Welcome. Today's public service announcement is don't be an asshole.
I think everybody needs to listen to that more because there's a lot of that going around.
Yeah.
All right. So this is the Bunny Rabbit Hole. If you've never been here before, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. All right. So what we do here is the two of us. My name happens to be Jason.
I am Craig.
And we're the co-hosts of the Bunny Rabbit Hole. What we do each and every week is we pick one central theme and we talk about that theme until something inspires us to talk about something different. When we talk about something different, we talk about that until finally we forgot what the fuck we were talking about in the first place. And then we have to go back to our notes and realize what the show was even supposed to be about.
Right. And as Jason said, we take one central theme. We spend about a week researching it. We research both sides of it. I'm going to put out a different disclaimer today because this is highly sensitive material, which can be a bit gruesome. So if something like that bothers you and you don't want to hear about it, you're going to want to tune out now because we're going to be talking about some fucked up shit today.
Yeah, I think we should just jump right into it because there's not, I mean, we'll try to make some jokes, but this is one of those subjects where it's really hard to.
Yeah, very much so. So today we are going to talk about Unit 731. And for those of you who don't know what Unit 731 is, I'm going to turn it over to Jason and let him tell you what it is.
Okay, so Unit 731 is the Japanese equivalent to Auschwitz. Now, everybody has heard about Auschwitz. They've heard of Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death, and all those stories of the experimentation on the Jews are widely spread. What a lot of people don't know was the Japanese were doing something very similar under the care of the Surgeon General. I'm going to slaughter his name too. It's Shiro Ishii. We're just going to call him Ishii from now on, okay?
You actually said his name right.
Nice. So, under the care, there's no care in this.
No,
okay?
No.
So they did horrific medical experiments, chemicalogical germ warfare experiments on humans.
Yep. And before you go too far into it, it's interesting to note that they did all of these experiments in the area of China that they occupied because in Japan, it was illegal to run these experiments.
Yes. And so I think right now is probably a good time to talk about Ichi.
Yeah.
And his background. So he was the fourth son of Katsuya Ishii. He was a local landowner and steak maker. And this is from a Chiba area of China. So he's a Japanese guy actually born in China, where the Japanese, like you said, occupied.
Right.
He went to an imperial school in Chiba. And he was in the fourth high school in the Sakwa Prefecture, which was, then he went to Kyoto Imperial University in 1921. He was commissioned as a Japanese army, and then as a military surgeon, and then eventually returning the rank of Surgeon General, which isn't, a lot of people just call him General Ishii, but he was technically a lieutenant general, which is a little less than full-on bird.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, we're going to talk about, and I don't know how much detail we're going to go into because, I mean, I don't know about you, but I watched a bunch of documentaries, read some websites and stuff like that. And this shit is hard. I mean, it's hard to talk about. And thank you, Alex, for suggesting this, asshole.
So I knew about Unit 731, but I never really went into it's one of those things where it's like, these are the worst atrocities on the planet, and these aren't things that they teach you in school anymore. They don't really go over the Holocaust as much as they used to. Well,
it's actually interesting that I want to touch something since you brought that up. In Japan, through regular school until you get to college, they do not teach anything about World War II. They've whitewashed this whole Unit 731. They don't talk about And the only reason the whole thing got exposed was because a medical student in Japan was in the bookstore and ran across human experiments of biological weapons. And that's opened the door for them to investigate and find out, hey, we did all this shit. Because there's still many people in Japan who deny this ever happened.
Yeah. I mean, there are Holocaust deniers, but this wasn't quite on that scale. But when I say on that scale, I'm only talking about the amount of victims. Okay, they didn't have a body count of 12 million like the Germans did, but they had enough.
Yeah, I mean, well over 300,000.
Yeah.
And I mean, and another interesting note, something I want to put out there is, everybody's like, well, you're bashing on the Japanese, you're bashing on the Germans for Auschwitz. I'm not saying anybody's innocent. Every country has done this. I mean, these people had basically their own Nuremberg trials, but were acquitted by the U.S. in order to get their research. But also in hindsight, going through all this, the reason the U.S. told Japan that if they used their chemical warfare against U.S. troops, then they would use the atomic bomb on them. Japan never used the chemical warfare on U.S. troops, but we still dropped the bomb because we wanted to see the effects of the radiation on civilians.
Right.
And that's really what it was all about. It was a research experiment.
Yeah.
It's a shitty one. Nobody should have to go through anything like that. Nobody should have to go. I mean, no country. Basically, what it comes down to is no country is innocent from atrocities like this.
Exactly, and we'll go into how innocent the U.S. really was in all of this. We'll do that later. That'll be like the punchline at the very end.
Right.
And it's a joke that's not funny.
Right. I mean, this makes that talking about this stuff makes dad jokes would be like primetime comedy.
Right. Okay. So I think let's just jump in with some of the stuff that they did. And the first one I want to talk about is the Frostbite Experiments.
That's the first one I want to talk about too. I mean, because that was horrific.
So one of the things that they did with the Frostbite Experiments, if you've ever seen, I'm not talking about the show Snowpiercer, but if you've ever seen the movie Snowpiercer, it's about a train in like a post-apocalyptic world where we're kind of in an ice age and it's freezing cold outside. But one of the punishments they have is they stick the person's arm outside of the train through a hole for a minute. And then when they bring it in, their arm is frozen solid, and then they smash it with a hammer.
Right.
Okay. This is some of the shit that they tried here.
Yeah. They would take people outside in freezing weather, chain them naked, and spray water and shit on them.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we talk about the reason for experimenting on frostbite is because they were considering invading Russia at the time.
Yes. And if anybody knows anything about World War II, one of the things that really was the downfall of the Germans was their war with Russia. Now, one thing that they didn't do was they did not anticipate the severity of the Russian winter. Right. So a lot of German soldiers, Nazis, died in the freezing cold because they just were ill-equipped to advance in feet of snow. Their tanks wouldn't move. Their trucks wouldn't move. They're trying to walk in feet of snow in March towards Moscow, and it just didn't work.
Right.
Now, I will say this, though, in this conflict between the two, the Germans still managed to kill 27 million Russians in World War II. That's a number that's over twice the amount that the Germans killed in concentration camps, but we're talking in actual warfare.
Right.
The Russians had the people at the time, they had the troops at the time, and they kept sending wave after wave after wave. And that's just how powerful of a machine the German army really was. Yeah. And they would have taken Moscow had they would have done it in the springtime instead of trying to do it in the middle of the winter.
Right. Yeah, well, I think Germany has winters. I mean, they have snow and stuff like that, but they don't have the freezing temperatures. I mean, you talk about, everybody thinks of cold, you think of Siberia. Siberia is part of Russia.
Yeah. Right.
You know, and that's just kind of, but you know, it's an interesting point because yeah, if they were done in spring, but I think they were worried about, they thought that, you know, if you look at the psychological aspect of it, they were probably thinking, well, you know, it's wintertime, so they're not going to be prepared for it.
Exactly. They would not expect it.
Russia is like Michigan. Winter is 9 months of the year.
Yeah. And they also kind of thought of it as in terms of like George Washington crossing the Potomac on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
You know, it was a catch people off guard.
Yeah.
However, it caught them off guard. And I do believe that at a certain point, the Germans believed that they may not have made it to springtime to fight them.
That's possible too.
So
I mean, you look at it. Yes, Germany had this well-trained, well-equipped, high-tech army of the time, and it took the entire world minus Italy and Japan to defeat them.
Yeah,
it wasn't just the U.S. I mean, it was, you had Britain, you had France, you had Russia, all these other countries. I mean, Spain was involved. All of them fought together. We were the allies to destroy the communist threat of, or the fascist threat of Adolf Hitler. And so that's why it's so easy to undershadow Unit 731, because when people think of World War II, they think of Auschwitz, they think of the concentration camps. It's all Germany. They don't talk a lot about Italy or Japan. They focus on Germany.
So even like when you go to Washington, D.C., the World War II monument is actually split up into two things. You can go there and find the names of the soldiers that perished in the European theater, and then there's the Pacific theater. Now, the Pacific theater is the one that's not talked about as much, unless you're talking about things like Pearl Harbor, the Bikini Atoll, dropping of the bombs, you know, Enola Gay. Those are the words and the images and the keywords that keep coming up when you talk about what we did on that. But I mean, yes, we had Pearl Harbor was in this time, and that's what officially got us into the war. But the Japanese actually occupied U.S. soil for a good chunk of this time. They actually had several of the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. They set up a base there. So they actually, it's the only foreign country that's ever occupied our soil in our history. And a lot of people don't know about that either.
Right.
But we don't talk about this side of the war. There's the two theaters. Don't talk about the Pacific theater enough. And that's why we don't know enough about the atrocities that happened here. Plus, they happened in China. They happened by the Japanese, a very secretive, to themselves culture, at least at this time, under an emperor that was occupying China, which was closed off to the world.
Right.
So it's really hard to get it was hard to get the information out about this. Right. But the Americans did.
Yeah. To their own gain.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's think about that, though. You're a prisoner. And the thing is, like, they recruited these doctors and surgeons and stuff from Japan, but they had a bunch of 14-year-old kids that were running around doing the dirty work for them.
Yeah.
So you're a 14-year-old kid, and you have to chain somebody out in the freezing cold and spray them with water and stuff just to see what's going to happen to them, knowing that you're causing them great physical harm. I mean, like, there is, where is it? Like, let me find it real quick. So, like, yes, an interview from a guy who's now, at the time of his interview, was a 72-year-old farmer. At the time, he was a 14-year-old boy. This is what he said. I cut him open from the chest to the stomach, and he screamed terribly, and his face was all twisted in agony. He made this unimaginable sound. He was screaming so horribly, but then finally he stopped. This was all in a day's work for the surgeons, but it really left an impression on me because it was my first time. At 14 years old.
And I think the most chilling thing about all that was he said it was my first time.
Right.
meaning this happened again.
Well, and let's go on and talk about like how the effects that's going to have on this 14-year-old boy, because it's scientifically proven your brain does not fully develop until the age of 26. So how do you compartmentalize this? Well, the way they did it was they were instructed to see all of the prisoners that they were experimenting on as logs, because they were right next door to a lumber yard. So, I mean, they would go back to, their dorms or wherever they slept at night and say, well, how many logs did you cut today? I cut 2. Well, I didn't cut any,
How many logs fell today?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's how they talked about it. And because they had to decompartmentalize it, and put it off to the side. Otherwise, it would have drove them insane.
Yeah. Yeah, they had to, and the same thing as the Germans, they looked at the Jews as being lesser, subhuman, and that's kind of what they did here. The only problem was, and here's the big distinction I think needs to be made between what the Japanese were doing and what the Germans were doing. The Germans had an identified enemy. Okay, they identified this race of Jews as being their enemy. The Japanese were doing it on Americans, Chinese, their own people. I mean, they were anybody they could get their hands on.
And Russians too, because they had Russian prisoners too.
Yes. But
I mean,
they weren't just, I mean, yes, there were some non-Jews that were actually in concentration camps.
Right.
But not many per capita. But here, it was essentially whoever they could get their hands on.
Right. And I would like to cite my source for what I took, because it's only fair, because I didn't interview this guy. It's an article from New York Times from March 17th of 1995 called Unmasking Horror, a Special Report, Japan Confronting Gruesome War Atrocities, written by Nicholas D. Kristoff.
Okay, thanks. So,
I just feel, being an artist, I would like it if somebody shared my work, they cited me. I'm trying to do the same. But I mean, so they would go on from we talked about, looking at frostbite and the effects. So then they went on to experimenting with the bubonic plague.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they would do is they would make these bombs and fill them with fleas that carried the plague and drop those bombs over China.
Yes. They, here, I'm trying to find the one thing that I said that I saw. Okay. One of them was the Chinese village of, it's Quzhou. It's a word that if used in Scrabble, nobody would accept it.
Right.
But what they did was it was on October 4th, 1940, they deployed multiple bomb casings that were filled with 30,000 infected fleas each. And what they did was the witnesses said the raid was like a fine reddish dust that settled on all the surfaces all over town, followed by a rash of painful flea bites that affected nearly everyone.
Right.
Nearly 2,000 civilians in that village died from that, and another 1,000 or so in neighboring villages because of the railway workers and it being affected and took it back to them.
Right. An interesting note too, there is actually an entire website dedicated to them, but they don't have as much material as I can find on other things. It's called unit731.org.
Yeah, and so I'm not gonna lay blame to them, but they're part of this Unit 731 Memorial Museum.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's kind of like the Holocaust Museum that we have in Washington, D.C., where they actually show a lot of the atrocities. It's pretty PG-13 for what actually happened there. A better site that I found was allthat'sinteresting.com. They have a Unit 731 thing. Okay. And I found actually a lot more information on that site than I did on 731.org.
Yeah, I got a lot of mine just from documentaries.
And then I watched a lot of YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, and the hard part about the documentaries is subtitles, because these people can't speak English. So,
And that was hard because you're like you, a lot of my research happens it goes on while I'm doing other things.
Right.
That this subject matter had to consume me because I was reading the subtitles because I had to, because I needed to know what they were saying.
Right. Now, when I read what that guy said about cutting that guy open,
Mm-hmm.
the reason why he cut that guy open is because he had been injected with the bubonic plague, and they wanted to see what it do to his internal organs.
Mm.
Can you imagine that? I mean, because he said, like, I mean, part that I didn't read out loud was one of the things he said was that the guy knew he was there, knew what was going to happen to him, and didn't put up a fight. He had just given up. He got to the point where there's no escape. I give up.
Mm.
You know, just wanting it basically to end quickly. Unfortunately, it did not end quickly for him. I mean, that is just horrifying. I mean, that's straight up Jeffrey Dahmer type shit.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's vivisection, which is, basically a live dissection.
Right.
There's no anesthetic, and they did a lot of this too, especially going back to the Frostbite experiments. They would just start cutting the limbs open to see what the damage to the tissue was while the person's still alive.
Right. And the reason why they said they didn't use their excuse, I'm put it this way, their excuse, because they didn't use any anesthesia or anything to dull the pain because they were afraid of what it would do to the chemicals they'd already introduced them to. They might, dilute them or something.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is just utter bullshit. It's just an excuse they use because they're inhumane people.
Right. Because anesthesia costs money.
Yep.
Well, so keeping on the lines of the vivisection thing, some of the experiments that they did. Now, we all know about the Joseph Mengele, injecting dye in people's eyes to see if he could change the eye color. And, though he did a lot of these cold water experiments on the body, but some of the things that they did here were they would remove and amputate limbs and try to attach them to the other side of the body to see if they could get them to work. So your left arm being on your right side and your right arm being on your left side. So you can start. Well, obviously, they don't have the advancements in medicine that they do today. They might be able to do it today, but then no.
Right.
They would also cut off circulation to people's limbs. And when they did this, it was all four limbs. The person was tied down, and then they just studied the effects of gangrene on this person's body as they lied dying on a table for months.
Right. And like some of their other testing, and I just read this and I just saw this for the first time, and I don't know if you saw the look on my face, but I was kind of
like I didn't even say anything shocking yet.
Human targets were used to test grenades positioned at various distance and in various positions. Flamethrowers were tested on humans. Humans were also tied to sticks and used as targets to test pathogen-releasing bombs, chemical weapons, and explosive bombs, as well as bayonets and knives.
Yeah, they wanted to see.
You already know what a knife and a bayonet's going to do to somebody. They didn't need to do that.
Right.
Ninjas and samurais came from fucking Japan. They know what that shit does.
And
but to see the test of the grenades, how fucked up is that? And they already know what fire's going to do to the human body.
Mm-hmm.
Why'd they need to test that?
They didn't.
I mean, okay, releasing the pathogen, the bombs and the chemical weapons. Okay, they don't know as much about that, so I understand. I mean, I don't understand, but I can see why they would experiment with that. And checking out the quality of their grenades or whatever, but you could do that with just like
sides of beef,
sides of beef or dead pigs or something,
Yeah.
You don't have to use a human body to do it, or take somebody who's already dead and see what it does to their body.
Exactly. You could use corpses.
Yep. Instead of causing so much pain and anguish on another human being that you have to share this world with. Obviously not for much longer, but
in one of the most disturbing things I saw about all this, cutting out the organs to see how they, or cutting open somebody just to watch the organ work live, until the person died, was the phrase, when a prisoner's body was all used up, it was typically shot or killed by lethal injection, although some may have been buried alive.
It's just, see, this is why I said this is a tough one. Doing the research was extremely difficult. I had to do it in small doses because of how horrible it is. And I mean, just the effect that it's having on me, it's pissing me right the fuck off.
Yeah.
But, and that's from an outsider who wasn't even involved in any of it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine being one of these 14-year-old kids that you have no choice but to do what they tell you to do?
Oh, right, because you're going to be you're going to be experimented on if you don't do it.
Right. You're already seeing what they're doing to all these prisoners, and if you refuse to do it or help prisoners escape, you're probably going to become one of those prisoners and, get bitten by a rat carrying the plague, or, any of the other shit that they did.
Yeah. When you're looking at Chinese, Mongolian, Korean, Russian, Americans all being, all roll through here as a 13, 14-year-old boy, maybe sometimes girl, that was doing, being the orderlies for them. You're watching them go through, and you can kind of compartment, as a child, you can kind of compartmentalize. It's like, okay, these particular 5 types of people are different than me. But then when the occasional Japanese person would roll through and be experimented on, I think that one's probably the one that struck the most fear,
right,
to them, because this is their own.
Yeah, and I mean, another thing that they would also do is their female prisoners, they would force them to get pregnant, so they could see the effects of, if these diseases can be transmitted from, the host to the baby.
Yes, from mother to child.
Right, in utero, however you call it. But they experimented on these pregnant women with the plague, with syphilis, with all this stuff. They want to see how it would affect their reproductive organs and all that, and what shape the baby would come out with. Because some of these babies were actually born. And as you guessed, yes, they experimented on them as well, because they wanted to know the effects of what they injected the mother with.
Right.
Yeah, this shit is really fucked up. It's pissing me off more every time. I mean, this is why I had to do it in small doses, because I get so worked up, I couldn't do anything else.
So now I'm going to kind of skip on to something else, so we can it's not going to be a palate cleanser, but it's going to be something. So the official end of World War II didn't happen until the 21st century.
Right.
It was like 2008 or 2007 or something like that, because Japan and Russia had never officially signed a treaty, an armistice, if you will.
Right.
And that finally happened in the early 20s. I'm blanking on when it actually was, but to this day,
2018, wasn't it?
Maybe it was later. It wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't long ago. But to this day, the Japanese government has not apologized to China for any of this.
Nope. The only reason they admitted to it is because they got found.
Yeah, they got caught.
But they didn't get caught until like 50 years after the fact, because it was 1984.
Right. And what had happened in those 50 years? Well, let me tell you about it. All right. So one major thing that happened within the end of World War II that is probably the largest wartime atrocity ever is a program called Operation Paperclip. Okay, what this was it was a secret way of getting German scientists out of Germany and pardoned and then put to work in the United States for their, for their knowledge. And this ultimately led to the advancement of our space program. Granted, these guys were the top, they were 10 years ahead of other engineers and scientists in their fields than any other person in the world. So the U.S. felt what they did in the war, their war crimes were less than what, the positive, meaning we could steal their research.
Right.
Okay. But they also did this with Dr. Ishii.
Yep.
Dr. Ishii was given a full pardon for his research and never faced trial for this at all.
Nope.
And most of the doctors that worked under him went back to Japan and assumed regular lives.
They not only assumed regular lives, they assumed prominent positions in their field.
Exactly. A lot of them went on to run universities, get residency in universities.
Some of them became heads of medical boards, like government medical boards.
Yeah.
Ishii, I believe, did.
Yes.
So he went from experimenting on people to basically running healthcare in Japan.
Yeah. So they were.
I guess who else knows how to save you better than somebody who knows every way to fucking kill you there is?
Right. You just don't do any of these things and you probably live.
Right.
So when you started talking at the beginning about atrocities and all this other stuff, we as Americans, our American government is okay. I'm going to put it this way. I'm going to change focus of my story. If you and I were to go to a store, I'm driving the car, you jump in the store, get into a fight with the store clerk as you're robbing the place, you kill the store clerk, jump back in my car, I take off. I don't drive straight to the police. I just go about our evening. I am now accessory to murder after the fact, can be charged with first-degree murder with you because I was there. I was complicit and a violent crime happened and I was the getaway driver. I can and would be prosecuted for murder as well. The United States, in this case, was complicit in what was going on and should be held accountable as an accessory after the fact.
Right. But the thing is who do you hold accountable? Because most of the people that were responsible for it are dead.
Exactly.
They died of old age years ago. Like it was basically McCarthy.
Yeah. So a lot of, and it's the same, and it's like, yes, something would have an apology or something should have been given, or should still be given. But it's also what I think about, and this might be controversial, but I don't think reparations for slavery should be a thing either. Because I'm going to tread lightly on this because a lot of the people
basically don't punish the son for the father's sins.
Well, yeah, we have come a long way since that period. We're not all the way there, but we're making strides.
No, and and for those white people that say there's no such thing as white privilege, fuck you, you're an idiot.
Right.
Granted, there's white privilege and then there's rich white privilege, which we don't have.
Which
because if Jason and I commit a crime, we're going to jail.
Yes.
But if you're rich, you're not.
Right. So, what is the answer for all of that? Is it too late for an apology? Probably, but
but they should at least. If I were if that was me in that instance, and I had just found out about this, and I say I didn't know slavery existed.
Mm-hmm.
I just found out about it, and I found out that part of my family were a big part of it from my ancestors. I would publicly apologize and denounce my ancestors' actions.
Right.
You know, because it's the right thing to do. It's the humane thing to do. It's living with empathy
Right.
for others. Like I have a lot of empathy for the 14-year-old kids that they force to do all this stuff. Do I have empathy for the surgeons and stuff like that? Maybe some of them, because some of them might have been forced to do it or have it done to them.
Like, yeah, very true.
You know, we don't know all the information, and like we do with all of ours, we're just scratching the surface. So if you want to know more about it, you can go research it, because after this, I'm never looking at Unit 731 again.
I probably won't ever again either. You know, but the reason, okay, here's the reason why I say that I want to clarify my reparations statement, because if you open that Pandora's box, then there are so many other things that our government will be on the hook for. And we done some fucked up shit in our days? Yeah. But every Native American would be awarded reparations. Every Jew would be awarded reparations for us not condoning or doing enough for the Holocaust. Every Christian would be on the hook for reparations towards all women for how they've treated women in the past as servants, slaves. You know, and if anytime they stand up to a man, they're a witch and we burn them. You know, anybody who was of a different religion than yours, you've been prosecuted and persecuted. So reparations would be in order. Yeah, we could go back farther and farther and farther. Everywhere along the line, you know, bad shit has happened to people. What we need to do is understand that bad shit has happened to you, bad shit's happened to me, bad shit's happened to our ancestors, bad shit's happened to your ancestors. What we need to do is come together and learn from it and make sure it doesn't repeat.
Right, which we're not doing a very good job of.
Giving you $4,000 to $5,000 to go, you know, spend on whatever, is that really honoring their memory?
No, it's trivializing it. It's monopolizing it.
It's
because
actually
they're giving you that money because they know you're going to spend it back in their stores.
It's actually buying your silence.
Yep.
And that's one of the reasons why I'm not for any monetary value towards this stuff. It's just like being, you know, the Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump civil case, where in it they were sued by families of little girls, and they silenced those families by paying them off.
Right.
You know, now it was basically those parents, you know, were paid.
The kids.
Yeah, they just prostituted their kids out. They found the dollar figure that allowed them to get away with it. And
right. And you know, I look at this shit that they've done, and I'm pissed off. I'm angry, but I'm glad I learned about it. Because knowledge is power. It truly is. And for those of you that are like, well, I don't need to know about all that shit, where's it going to help me in life? You're learning a valuable lesson about what's been done in the past and what steps to take to prevent it from happening again in the future. Unfortunately, like I said earlier, we're not learning from history. We are starting to repeat it. Exactly.
Yes, we are.
And that's why things need to happen. You know, everybody's like, oh, we're part of the cancel culture now. No, it's not cancel culture. It's consequences culture. Yes, you have freedom of speech, but you do not have freedom of the consequences of that speech. You can sit there and mouth off all you want. Yeah, you have the right to do that. But you also should be held accountable for what you say and for what you do.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to the unit here for a minute.
Okay.
And because of the biological chemical warfare stuff that they did here, we went on to take their information, their research, and we ultimately came up with different ways of creating biological and germ and chemical weapons. We came up with, you know, we went from putting fleas in a bomb all the way to VX gas, which is one of the worst chemicals ever created by man, Supposedly, the Russians actually have one through a project they have that's actually worse than VX gas, but it's never actually been used anywhere. VX has actually been used a few times in our world. And if you've never seen VX, if you've ever seen the movie The Rock with Sean Connery, and go back and watch our Sean Connery episode if you would, in Nicolas Cage, where they're going to send these missiles into San Francisco, they're filled with VX gas, but there's a point where they're stealing the missiles from a base, and the dude gets locked behind a thing, and you watch basically his face melt and stuff. VX is a nasty, nasty thing. So a full ban on all of these type of weapons, and supposedly a disarmament was supposed to happen after March 26, 1975, by the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, meaning you weren't even supposed to research making worse versions of the shit that we already have, and you're supposed to start getting rid of it.
Right.
But the Russians, in the 80s, it came out when the fall of the Soviet Union happened. They had a project called the Chimera Project. What the Chimera Project was, they were actually trying to mix viruses. They were trying to mix a virus that was part Ebola, part smallpox, and then emit that as a weapon.
Right.
Now, that would have been a world killer.
Right.
Had that got out, because, well, first of all, I mean, Ebola is, if you've never seen the movie Outbreak, that's what Ebola does.
Right.
And smallpox, that's what we gave to the Native Americans on blankets.
Yep.
To take their land. So they're both fucked up chemical or viruses.
Well, and here's an interesting note too about, so basically when World War II ended, Japan went through and destroyed, all their facilities, the research facilities, and killed all of the logs. Yes. And burnt them on metal slabs in the yards. And the ones that they didn't have time to burn, they threw into this river. I can't pronounce the name of it. I don't remember. It begins with a Y. But under the American, and this I'm taking from Wikipedia, so take this with a grain of salt, because we all know how good research is on Wikipedia.
And if you don't like it, I'll go back and change it.
Yep. As above, under the American occupation, the members of Unit 731 and other experimental units were allowed to go free. One graduate of Unit 1644, Masami Kitoko, continued to do experiments on unwilling Japanese subjects from 1947 to 1956 while working for Japan's National Institute of Health Sciences. He injected prisoners with rickettsia and mental health patients with typhus. And then goes on to say, Shiro Ishii, as the chief of the unit, was granted war crime immunity from the U.S. occupational authorities because of his provisions of human experimentation research materials that he gave to the U.S. from 1948 to 1958. Less than 5% of the documents were transferred onto microfilm and stored in the National Archives of the United States before being shipped back to Japan. So we're like, yeah, you can go free. We just want 5% of your research. And
5%.
And I'm pretty sure we can probably guess what that 5% was.
Curing the common cold.
Yeah, it was. This is all the bad shit that happens. This is all the stuff we did, but this is the results. That's all we really wanted, was the results.
Yeah. Or it was just yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of people. I mean, there's deniers all over the place, just like there's Holocaust deniers, just like there's school shooting deniers and stuff like that. These people basically suffering from cognitive dissonance, and they're burying their heads in the sand.
Yes.
It's important to know the atrocities that your people, whatever, however you say it, that your people have done throughout history. Like we said, we keep saying, so they're not repeated.
Mm-hmm.
And, the CIA experimented with a lot of shit.
Oh yeah, look up MK Ultra.
Yeah, and like a lot of the drug culture in the U.S. was created by the government.
LSD, crack, heroin. They're all influenced.
It's a form of population control when it comes down to it.
It's population control, and it's also income control.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can get somebody willing to give up their life for a high, then it's really easy to control them. You know, you don't have to worry about this segment of society becoming, you know, powerful compared to the elite ruling class if you can bring them down with a drug.
Yep.
You make that drug super easy, super addictive, and cheap.
Cheap until the point where they've used it so much they run out of money. Then you kind of up the price a little bit, so they have to go on the black market and get bad shit, and that's the bad shit that kills them. And
right.
Then it's population control. It's gone from income control to population control.
Right, and it's also, yeah, we don't even go into like the opiate crisis and
right, and the invasion of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
All right, so back to Unit 731. I'm sorry. It's just these are not going back to them. These are the rabbit holes that are created by researching this bullshit. Is because you're pissed off, and so you start projecting it, and you're trying to find something, as you said earlier, palate cleanser, something that's going to piss you off a little bit less. But that thing that's pissing you off a little bit less, you end up ranting about for an hour and a half because now you're extremely pissed.
Right, and that's why it took so long to research this, because you started, you know, even some of the episodes that I was watching about this. Next thing you know, I'm watching, you know, the Nazi base on Antarctica.
Right.
And I'm like, wait a minute, how did I get here?
Right.
I was supposed to be in Japan.
Yeah. Oh, and the way they experimented with syphilis is they would infect people with syphilis and force them to have sex with people that did not have it. To see how easily it was transmitted and stuff like that. Which, I guess, in a way, a good lesson was learned from that.
So I got into a conversation.
I'm trying to find a positive light. I'm sorry.
I got into a conversation years ago about some of the atrocities and the medical experiments that happened in Auschwitz. Okay, this is before I really knew anything about what was going on with the Japanese, especially particularly this unit. But one of the things that came up was like, there are some medical questions that were answered. You know, like you can't change somebody's eye color by injecting dye into their eyes. Now, long since then, we've learned how to even tattoo somebody's eyes to completely change their eye. But at the time, it was like, I don't know, is it possible? I don't know. You know, modern medicine wasn't as up to where it is today. But, you know, I'm sure at some level they were just trying to answer trivial little questions.
Yeah, well, they figure, where are you doing all this shit? Let's find out everything.
You know, so, I mean, a lot of it probably, you know, it should have been, you know, common knowledge or, you know, common sense that, no, you can't do that. But they did it, and now we know. Did they really need to do it? Absolutely not.
No.
So if there's a silver lining, now we know some of these trivial answers are true, but we didn't need to know that.
No, we really didn't. I mean, we know that sexual diseases are transmitted sexually.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, back then, it's possible they didn't know that.
And it didn't sound, I didn't hear the word searching for a cure at any point in time.
No, they were never searching for a cure.
You know, how do we stop the transmission other than not have this infected person sleep with this other person?
And you're starting me down another rabbit hole. Because, as we know, you can't make money curing people, but you can make a shitload of money treating their symptoms.
Exactly. That's why the common cold is that we can't find a cure for it because you're not trying.
All right, so some children grew up inside the walls of Unit 731 infected with syphilis. A youth corps member deployed to train at Unit 731 recalled viewing a batch of subjects that would undergo syphilis testing. One was a Chinese woman holding an infant, one was a white Russian woman with a daughter of 4 or 5 years of age, and the last was a white Russian woman with a boy about 6 or 7. The children of these women were tested in ways similar to their parents, with specific emphasis on determining how longer infection periods affected the effectiveness of treatments. As I said, they experimented on the offspring of the people that they intentionally impregnated.
Yes. Going back
That's how long this shit went on.
Yeah.
Long enough for these people to give birth and the kids to grow to the ages of 6 or 7.
Yeah. Well, they also wanted to test the effects of pressure on the body in high altitude flights.
Yep.
So they had a centrifuge that, and we have this in NASA. You see it in like space camp where you get strapped into the little thing and then they spin you around, spin. But they're only doing, a few G's in here. 1 G equals, the effect of gravity on your body. So 2 G's would be twice your body weight affected on your body, three times your body weight, and so on. They were spinning people to 15 to 16 G's.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately they passed out or died from the pressure. Now think a 200-pound person, that's 3,000 to 3,200 to 3,000 pounds of pressure, essentially a small car sitting on top being pushed up against them. Now, they did find that children, amazingly, didn't have the same resilience to G forces. So they passed out or died at a much, much slower rate. Like, really? You didn't, a full-grown man can make 15, but you think this 3-year-old kid is going to even come close?
Right.
At a certain point, you have to think that they only did some of this shit just for fun. Hey, what if you put a kid in there? Oh, that's a good idea.
Right. Well, and the thing is, too, is like, this is what I found really interesting, because at the Zhangma Fortress, where all this really started, they would train put prisoners on a train and deliver them there.
Mm-hmm.
And when the prisoners are first on their way, they give them all the food that they want, their usual diet, and some of them they even gave alcohol to, because they wanted to have them in their normal state before starting the experiments on them.
Yeah, they wanted them healthy.
Yeah. So if you're a prisoner, you're like, oh well, shit, they're treating us good. Maybe this won't be so bad. Holy fuck! I got the bubonic plague.
And then they go through the gates to the place, and there's people chained to them.
Yeah. Wait! You can't put that barbed wire covered dildo up my ass.
Yeah.
It's gonna hurt.
Oh wait. The barbed wire dildo is the least of my worries. It's the syphilis and the bubonic plague that's attached to it.
Right. It's shit like this that makes me wonder how. And we've heard about this, and us being big D&D fans growing up, so we were really like versed in medieval culture.
Yeah.
One of the torture things that they would do in medieval times was take a pot, put a rat in the pot, strap the pot on somebody's belly so that rat couldn't escape, and then heat the backside of the pot so the rat would chew its way through you.
It would go to the easiest route out, which is through you.
Yep. So, I mean, that's just an example of Japan's not the only people doing fucked up shit.
Right. I heard there was I'm trying to remember if it was in France or what. I was watching this this show last night on YouTube where it said it was the most prolific serial killers in world history. Okay. And what they did was they took the score that the person claimed to have killed and then what they were estimated to kill. And then they averaged those out and came up with a score. So instead of like giving out numbers throughout, it's like at a number at 35, it's, Jeffrey Dahmer. It's 55, it's Ted Bundy. They didn't do it like that. But when they got to the very top one, this motherfucker was estimated he was a bandit, I believe, was one of them, because I watched a bunch of these, but but estimated to kill almost 900 people. Yeah. So what they ended up doing with him was day one, they peeled his skin off while he was alive.
Mm.
Okay. That's day one. Then they left him in a cell. Day two, they poured oil on his feet and cooked his lower half. Okay. That's day two. So now you're skinned and you're cooked.
Can you imagine the smell?
Right. Day three, they attached him to a wheel and broke him to bits. You know,
this shit is fucked up.
Yeah. So
yeah, go ahead.
This was done to somebody who deserved it.
Right. But by doing that to somebody that deserves it, doesn't it make you the same as them?
It does.
Wouldn't it make you more of a humane person if you just gave them a quick death?
Mm-hmm.
Because then you're not stooping to their level.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, there are people that are just so evil that they probably shouldn't live. I'm not the judge of that. I don't know who those people are, and I don't want to know who those people are.
Right.
But you know, that is why we elect people. Unfortunately, we elect the wrong people a lot of times. But especially, and I'm going to back around to your serial killer thing here in a minute. But you know, it's up to these people to decide whether or not these people live or die. You know, mm-hmm. I can't have that on my conscience. I could never live with myself.
Yeah.
These people are pretty much immune to it at this point when they get to that, when they get to high enough office where they can do that. Yes. But anyway, so back to the serial killer thing, because that's going to take me into politics, and I don't want to go into politics. Wouldn't you consider the most successful serial killer of all time to be Adolf Hitler?
Yeah.
I don't understand why they're not listed as serial killers.
True. And because if you think of when you list serial killers or you watch any of these serial killer shows, Charles Manson is always listed as a serial killer. Well, Charles Manson has ever been proven to kill one person himself.
Right.
He killed some guy that was at the ranch, and then they buried him. But he wasn't at either of the homes.
Nope.
But yet he's still a prolific serial killer. Serial killers means 3 or more crimes on separate occasions. Or 3 or more murders at separate occasions. So, you know, all the other ones were, I still don't even believe the other ones that were convicted were actually technically serial killers. I still think they were spree killers.
Right.
But going back to Charlie, is he was labeled and convicted and then sentenced to death or, you know, in life in prison for being a serial killer by leading the others to do the act. That's right. Exactly what Hitler did.
Right. That's exactly what Ishi did.
Yeah. Yeah. He led the others. And yeah, Ishi's the same way. And at that point, couldn't you say it was Emperor Hirohito?
Yeah. Yeah, because he sanctioned it.
Yeah.
Ishi couldn't do any of the stuff without Hirohito's approval.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the majority of these people that did these crimes are dead. I mean, you watch the documentaries, some of the people that were still alive that they're interviewing, like one guy was basically bedridden. He could stand up for like 5 minutes a day. The rest of the time he had to lay down because he was in so much pain. They're like old as shit. I mean, if I were to guess at their age, Japanese people, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be racist, but they don't age well.
Mm.
So they could be 60 and look 90.
Yeah, and
I wouldn't know the difference.
So when you think about it, this same about World War II veterans, you know, Americans, you know, these guys were in their 20s, you know, late 17, 18, 19, 20, you know, in that range for most of them.
Right.
You know, so these prisoners were probably close to that same age range. We'll just say 20 because it's an easy math number.
Right.
And that was in 1940. 95, that puts them at 75.
Right.
You know, I highly doubt any of them are alive today.
Yeah, I highly doubt it too. And I mean, the people that, going back to the restitution thing, like, yes, Japan needs to be held accountable for their actions, but they pretty much were with all the sanctions that were laid on them after World War II, where they couldn't have an army anymore, where they couldn't do anything.
Mhm.
But through that, so they could. This is what I find ironic. So Japan couldn't have an army, so that money that would have went to their military, they used to build their infrastructure and have one of the best economies in the world now.
Right.
Wonder why that is.
Right. And let's look at who followed suit. So China, up until like the 80s, was basically a third world country.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did was they opened up economic free zones, or they call them free trade zones. So they're communist everywhere else except for this city. And they started off with one or two cities. And what they allowed was people to open factories in these cities that were allowed to trade with the rest of the world.
Right.
And they ended up doing this multiple times. Now, from the 1980s when this started to, just the other day, I saw a thing that said, of the 42 cities in the world that have a population of over 10 million, 16 of them are in China. All 16 of these are these economic free trade zones.
Yep.
And by 2025, China is actually going to outpace the United States for global economy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've already got the population. I mean, so it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And we keep shipping everything out to other places to get made. And I'm a strong proponent of, you can't bitch about sweatshops and stuff like that unless whenever you buy something, you look to see where it's made from.
Right.
None of us do that. I can't bitch about them.
No, I'm looking at my mouse here in the bottom of it, and half of it's written in letters that are, no, right there it says made in China.
Mine doesn't even say it. It's Logitech though, so it's probably made in China.
That's what mine is, and it says made in China right on the bottom of it. So
mine's all worn off.
Okay.
So it's probably made in China. But yeah, I mean,
so
we buy these because they're affordable. If they're made in the US, they wouldn't be affordable. I'm not trying to justify anything here. Don't get me wrong. I'm not. Don't cross my signals. I'll do that on my own.
Let me go back to reparations again.
Okay.
So instead of sending everybody a check that may or may not have had a family member that was a slave, or in the Holocaust, or in Native American, or whatever, that instead of handing out all this free income to them, we reinvest in their communities.
Yeah. Or, and this is kind of a way of reinvesting in the communities, we give these people education that will result in a job, which the more people that have jobs, the better your economy is.
Mm-hmm.
Because corporations are not spending money. Their employees are spending money. So when people are like, well, we got these tax cuts. No, the corporations got the tax cuts. They're getting all the money. Trickle-down economics does not work. It's been proven time and time again.
Right. Because
the people that put money into the economy are your average day you and me's.
Mm-hmm.
We have jobs that pay us so much, but we have to buy stuff. Rich people don't spend money because they pretty much get everything for free.
Right.
I mean, they're going to spend like, a couple $1 million on a home and shit like that, but they don't get rich by spending money.
Right.
I mean, they invest a little bit into their company and then it pays back.
What if we took that money and rebuilt Detroit, rebuilt Gary, Indiana, rebuilt Mobile, Alabama, rebuilt New Orleans, rebuilt, Dallas, revitalized Skid Row in Los Angeles? What if we took that money and invested into the infrastructure in all of these areas to bring in new businesses to get jobs
what if we took part of that money though and put it into research on ways where we could create things that the process of creating that doesn't destroy our fucking planet?
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about just rebuilding I'm just talking simply because researching climate and all that, it's not going to appease people who want reparations.
Right.
So education, I think, is a decent idea. I think revitalizing the communities that they live in is a decent idea. But I want to go back to China for a second. In the last 3 years, so starting at 18, 19, 20, 2018, 2019, 2020, China has poured more concrete than the United States has poured in the last 100 years.
Holy shit.
They have so much public works projects going on in their country to, yes, they're still beating down there's still human rights violations up the ass, but it's a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah. But then again, we didn't become the leading economy without a bunch of human rights violations either.
Right. Well, true. But one of the things that they built, or they're in the process of building right now, is an artificial river, which will be the 5th longest in the world, which is bringing water from the northern mountains all the way through to all the villages along the way, where these places don't have access to enough water for them to grow. So it's things like that. Now, if we would reinvest in our own country, we wouldn't have a drawbridge on an interstate system like we have right here in Vancouver, Washington, going over to Portland. It's a fucking drawbridge. So, meaning when a ship comes over, the bridge goes up, fucking interstate shuts down. Now imagine, having 75 shut down in Michigan.
Ah, shit.
Just in the middle of the day.
Yep.
That's what happens here in I-5. Plus it's a 100-year-old bridge. It's about to fall down anyway.
Right.
But we have so much nonsense going on trying to replace it that it's like they're talking a difference of $1.5 billion.
Right.
Well, if the government would just fund it, it's the price of a fucking jet fighter.
Right. Well, see, now my reasoning for the climate thing was because if we researched cleaner ways to make products, then we could bring the making products back to the U.S.
Yes.
Which would create jobs.
Yes.
And I had and my question about, okay, I like the idea of making the man-made river, blah, blah, blah. You're taking that water from the northern mountains. What's the effect that's going to have in those mountains, though?
We don't know yet. It's just all the snow runoff that normally would run into the Yellow River and normally heads out. But I see where you're talking about there, but it's kind of like bringing the water from Lake Mead to Los Angeles.
Right.
As long as the water from the Colorado River keeps up with it, Lake Mead will stay there, but it's not.
Right.
It's low every year. It's lower and lower. Yeah,
and so it just makes. It's like what happened here last year when Wixom Lake, the dam broke and Wixom Lake disappeared.
Yeah.
Out in Sanford, because a dam that for 30 years they've been warning them that it's going to break, it's going to give. They did nothing about. Now it does. Now these people had all this waterfront property, have nice marshy land property.
Right.
Because there's no longer a lake there.
And there probably won't be ever again.
Nope. And these people that was their dream retirement home, they're fucked.
Yeah.
They lost everything. Some of them lost their homes. You know, but this lake that they had, which was their dream home, their dreams are dead.
Yeah. You can't sell it.
Nope.
Nobody wants to live next to a mud puddle.
Nope. And if you do sell it, you're going to sell it for a major loss.
Yeah.
But all right, back to Unit 731. It fucking sucked. I think that's enough about Unit 731. I can't handle it anymore.
I think
so to sum up today, we talked about some really shitty things that happened during World War II.
Yeah. in both theaters.
Hey, Jason.
Yes, Craig.
I see these T-shirts in the background on a screen. Where could one get one of those T-shirts?
If you go to the link in this very video at the bottom where it says T-shirts, you can get one of our handy dandy magical Bunny Rabbit's Hole logo T-shirts and sweatshirts and bags and all sorts of wonderful products.
Hey, what's the average price of one of those?
Well, you can get this magnificent that men's hoodie for only $33.
That's not bad at all.
That's
Hoodies
not
are
bad
usually around 50 bucks.
For a printed hoodie. That's not bad at all.
Yeah. Do you have any zipper hoodies?
T-shirts start off at 19.
That's not bad.
Mm-mm.
Usually you're paying 20, 25 online for a t-shirt, so that's not bad. Any zipper hoodies?
There's all sorts of stuff on there. I'm pretty sure there is.
Any tank tops?
Yes, there's tank tops, there's women's styles, there's men's styles, there's kids styles.
Awesome. Any like baby onesies?
I think there might be.
All right. What about like a mouse pad?
I'm not sure if there's actual merchandise on there other than bags yet.
Okay. All right. Had to ask. I was curious about it. I saw it in the background. I'm like, hey, I haven't seen that. So I'm going to check that out.
But we're working on it.
Yep. What about hats?
Let's go. All products. Hats, not yet.
All right. I think hats would be a big seller.
Yeah.
We should get hats. So.
I think so too.
The big lesson from today's podcast is commercialism isn't dead. Probably should be, but yeah, we're going to push our product because why not? Everybody else does. Exactly. We got merch. So yeah, but let's learn from history and stop repeating it. Please, I beg people, start educating themselves. Our goal is to not teach you. Our goal is to pique your interest so that way you go and look at shit more yourself.
Exactly. We don't claim to be the experts. We just claim to, want to know more.
Right. And if you stop learning, you stop living.
Right.
And you should every day want to better yourself. So with that being said, don't be assholes, people. I love you.
Insert something here.